When the U.S. imposes tariffs on Mexico's key agricultural products, Mexico's economy faces significant challenges. However, this crisis also opens up new opportunities for Mexico as it seeks alternative markets, such as China and the EU. Can Mexico seize this opportunity to change the global trade landscape? In today's video, we will explore this controversial topic, but please note, this content is purely analytical and educational, not representing any political viewpoint. Let's approach it with an open and objective mindset. Reaction of Mexican farmers to U.S. tariff policies. Mexican farmers are facing severe economic challenges due to the tariffs imposed by the U.S. on key agricultural products such as tomatoes, avocados, chili peppers, and vegetables. These tariff hikes have made the cost of exporting to the U.S. prohibitively high, undermining the economic viability of trade relations between the two countries. As a result, Mexican farmers can no longer maintain the stable incomes they once had from exporting these goods to the U.S. The impact of the tariffs extends beyond individual farmers and is affecting the entire agricultural sector in Mexico. Rising production costs have made it harder for small and medium-sized producers to remain competitive, while the price of agricultural products has soared, leading to noticeable shortages of these goods in U.S. supermarkets and grocery stores. Items like tomatoes, avocados, and chili peppers, which were once common and affordable, have become expensive and hard to find, causing concern among American consumers and Mexican producers who were previously dependent on the U.S. market. Furthermore, Mexican agricultural businesses are facing significant uncertainty about the future of the industry if this situation continues. Farmers worry that if there is no change, they may have to reduce production or abandon certain crops altogether. At the same time, Mexico's agricultural sector is not only grappling with external economic factors, but also with unpredictable shifts in international trade politics. In order to mitigate the financial damage from U.S. tariffs, Mexican farmers are seeking to redirect their exports to new markets, including China, the European Union, and Canada. While this shift presents challenges such as higher quality requirements and more complex trade regulations, it is a necessary opportunity to reduce dependence on the U.S. and diversify income sources. Expanding export markets is a crucial step in helping Mexican farmers maintain economic stability and secure long-term profits for the national agricultural industry. Although this transition is not easy, it represents an important opportunity to adapt and survive in a rapidly changing global trade environment. Looks like these tariffs are giving Mexican farmers a real run for their money. But hey, maybe it's time for a global farm-to-table revolution, where avocados and tomatoes get a passport and go on a world tour. Who's ready for some international veggie adventures? Market diversification strategy and seeking new trade relations. In the face of difficulties due to U.S. tariffs, Mexico sees this as an opportunity to restructure its export strategies and seek new trade partners. One of the key strategic moves Mexico is making is expanding its export market to China. With its large market size and growing demand for agricultural products, China has become a potential partner. According to trade organizations, the amount of agricultural products imported from Mexico to China has grown significantly, increasing by up to 30%. This not only helps Mexico increase export revenue, but also reduces dependence on the U.S. dollar and the U.S. economy. China is now becoming an important market for Mexico, especially as the U.S. continues to implement protectionist policies on foreign agricultural products. In addition to China, Mexico is also actively developing trade relations with other partners such as the European Union and Canada. While these partners may not entirely replace the U.S. market, strengthening ties with Europe and Canada can help Mexico stabilize its export revenue and reduce reliance on a single country. Both Europe and Canada are stable markets with high demand for agricultural products, especially fresh items like fruits and vegetables. For Mexico, expanding trade relations with these countries is a long-term strategy to build a more sustainable economic foundation in the future. This market diversification strategy aims not only to minimize the damage from U.S. tariff policies, but also to reduce Mexico's reliance on the U.S. dollar, thereby protecting its economy from unforeseen external fluctuations. Furthermore, establishing new trade relations brings not only immediate economic benefits, but also strengthens Mexico's position in the global economy, allowing the country to develop sustainably and increase its influence in international relations. However, for this strategy to succeed, Mexico must continue to improve its export infrastructure, enhance product quality, and implement policies that support agricultural businesses in accessing international markets. The transition from relying on a single market to diversifying export markets may not be an easy process, but it is certainly the path Mexico needs to pursue to achieve sustainable development in the future. Our impact on U.S. consumers. The reduction in agricultural exports from Mexico is having immediate and significant repercussions for U.S. consumers, particularly in major supermarket chains. Mexican agricultural products, such as tomatoes, avocados, chili peppers, and fresh vegetables, which have long been integral to American household shopping baskets, are now facing severe shortages due to the implementation of tariffs and export restrictions. These items, which once filled the shelves of grocery stores like Walmart and Target, are now increasingly hard to find, and the prices for these staples have risen sharply. The direct consequence of this scarcity is that consumers, especially those with middle and lower incomes, are feeling the financial pressure. With everyday essential items like tomatoes and avocados becoming more expensive, families are now forced to make difficult decisions on how to allocate their budgets. Supermarket chains, which have historically relied heavily on agricultural imports from Mexico, are now facing supply shortages that disrupt their ability to maintain regular stock levels. This has led them to either ration products or search for alternative sources from other countries. However, finding substitutes is not a simple solution, as new markets are often not yet equipped to provide the same quantities of these products at comparable quality. This creates an additional layer of strain on both retailers and consumers. Prices for items that were once affordable have spiked, and the options available on supermarket shelves have diminished, leading to a less diverse range of products for consumers to choose from. For the long term, this situation could instigate a cascade effect, where consumers must adapt to new shopping habits. Many may turn to lower-cost alternatives or reduce their spending overall. This shift could lead to significant changes in consumer behavior, with an increased focus on finding cheaper substitutes for the products they once relied on. Retailers, on the other hand, will face reduced revenues as demand for agricultural products remains high but supply is limited. The resulting supply chain disruptions could also lead to higher operating costs for these retailers, further exacerbating the economic challenges facing both businesses and consumers. The scarcity of goods and the rising costs highlight the risks of over-reliance on a single market, signaling the need for diversification in trade relationships and more stable supply chains. This situation also underscores how fragile global trade relationships can be when one country becomes overly dependent on another for essential goods. The disruption caused by the tariff policies not only harms U.S. consumers, but also serves as a wake-up call for the need to create more resilient and diversified supply chains. The reliance on a single trade partner, especially one that can impose sudden policy changes, makes both businesses and consumers vulnerable to unpredictable shifts in international trade dynamics. In my opinion, relying too heavily on a single trade partner makes the economy vulnerable. The U.S. needs to diversify its trade relationships to ensure long-term stability. If not, disruptions like the current situation will continue and negatively affect both consumers and businesses. Long-term impact on Mexico's exports. Furthermore, Mexican agricultural businesses are facing significant uncertainty about the future of the industry if this situation continues. Farmers worry that if there is no change, they may have to reduce production or abandon certain crops altogether. At the same time, Mexico's agricultural sector is not only grappling with external economic factors, but also with unpredictable shifts in international trade politics. In order to mitigate the financial damage from U.S. tariffs, Mexican farmers are seeking to redirect their exports to new markets, including China, the European Union, and Canada. While this shift presents challenges such as higher quality requirements and more complex trade regulations, it is a necessary opportunity to reduce dependence on the U.S. and diversify income sources. Expanding export markets is a crucial step in helping Mexican farmers maintain economic stability and secure long-term profits for the national agricultural industry. Although this transition is not easy, it represents an important opportunity to adapt and survive in a rapidly changing global trade environment. Looks like these tariffs are giving Mexican farmers a real run for their money. But hey, Maybe it's time for a global farm-to-table revolution, where avocados and tomatoes get a passport and go on a world tour. Who's ready for some international veggie adventures? Despite these challenges, Mexico's pivot toward markets such as China and Europe could have several long-term benefits. By reducing reliance on the U.S., Mexico will not only protect itself from the volatility of U.S. trade policies, but will also diversify its export revenue streams, making its economy more resilient to external shocks. The diversification of export markets offers a way for Mexico to safeguard its agricultural sector from potential disruptions caused by U.S. protectionism. Additionally, this strategy has the potential to enhance Mexico's position in the global economy, increasing its presence in markets outside of the U.S. and opening new avenues for trade and economic growth. In the long run, this shift could lead to a restructuring of global agricultural supply chains, with more countries seeking to reduce their dependence on traditional trade partners like the U.S. By expanding trade relationships with other countries, Mexico is not only safeguarding its own economy but also contributing to a more balanced and diversified global trade environment. However, for this strategy to be successful, Mexico must implement long-term strategies that focus on increasing competitiveness, improving quality standards, and adapting to the demands of new markets. It will also need to introduce policies that support its agricultural sector, ensuring that producers can successfully compete in these new markets. Only by doing so will Mexico be able to maintain stability and foster growth in its agricultural exports over the coming decades. Impact on the U.S. food industry. The shortage of agricultural products imported from Mexico has become an increasingly pressing issue for the U.S. food industry. Essential items such as tomatoes, avocados, chili peppers, and fresh vegetables, which have long been integral to the daily meals of American households, are now experiencing significant scarcity and sharp price increases. These products, once readily available and affordable, have now become harder to find and considerably more expensive, putting a strain on U.S. consumers. The shortage is exacerbating inflation in the food industry, particularly at a time when food prices have already been rising steadily over the past months. Large supermarket chains, such as Walmart and Target, which traditionally rely heavily on imported agricultural goods from Mexico, are now facing difficulties in maintaining the supply of these essential products. To cope with this shortage, they have begun limiting the availability of these goods, often rationing them or offering smaller quantities on their shelves. As a result, U.S. consumers are now faced with limited options for products that were once staples in their households, and the increasing demand for these goods, combined with the restricted supply, is only driving prices higher. The impact of these price hikes is particularly severe for middle and low-income households, as these groups are often the most dependent on affordable, basic food items. The consequences of this shortage are not limited to the urban centers where these large supermarket chains operate. Rural areas, which often rely on Mexican imports for their food supply, are also experiencing significant shortages. The disruption of the supply chain has had a particularly pronounced effect in these regions, where access to fresh produce from Mexico has been an integral part of the food distribution system. The higher prices and limited availability of fresh products are placing an additional financial burden on families in these areas, further deepening the economic disparities between urban and rural populations. In addition to the shortage of fresh produce, processed food items such as spices, canned goods, and ready-to-eat meals, which often contain ingredients sourced from Mexico, are also becoming more expensive and harder to find. These shortages are having a ripple effect, creating supply chain disruptions that affect not only fresh produce, but also packaged food products that depend on these same agricultural inputs. This growing scarcity is forcing food businesses and retailers to explore alternatives. However, replacing the goods from Mexico with products from other countries is not a straightforward task. While nations such as China or other South American countries may be able to offer replacement goods, they are often unable to match the scale and quality of what Mexico has traditionally supplied, particularly for perishable fresh produce. Consequently, the supply of key products remains limited, which further exacerbates the price increases. Supermarkets are left grappling with a double challenge: Not only are they unable to meet the growing demand for these essential items, but they must also bear the rising costs associated with sourcing alternative supplies. This situation brings into sharp focus the risks associated with over-reliance on a single supplier for essential food products. The shortage of these goods has exposed the vulnerabilities inherent in global supply chains, highlighting the critical need for diversification in sourcing and trade relationships. It underscores the importance of establishing more resilient and flexible supply chains that can withstand disruptions caused by policy changes or geopolitical tensions. The ongoing shortage also emphasizes the necessity for the U.S. to explore and foster trade relationships with multiple countries in order to reduce its dependency on any single source of agricultural imports. By doing so, the U.S. could mitigate the risks posed by protectionist policies or market fluctuations and ensure a more stable and reliable food supply for its consumers. China's growing investment in Mexico. In the midst of tensions between the U.S. and Mexico caused by tariff policies and shifting trade dynamics, China has increasingly turned its attention to Mexico, significantly expanding its investments in the country. This development adds complexity to the economic and trade situation in the region, with potential long-term implications not only for Mexico's economy, but also for the broader global trade landscape. These investments are not only an opportunity for Mexico to strengthen its economic development, but also represent a strategic effort by China to build deeper ties with one of Latin America's most important economies. By increasing its investments in Mexico, China is positioning itself as a key player in the region, with the potential to reshape the trade and economic structures of the Americas. China's investments in Mexico have been particularly significant in key industries such as manufacturing, infrastructure, and energy. These investments have provided Mexico with much-needed capital, helping to drive the development of its industries, expand production capacity, and reduce its reliance on traditional trade partners like the United States. Through these investments, Mexico is improving its industrial base, creating new opportunities for export growth, and building a more diversified economic foundation. The influx of Chinese capital is also enabling Mexico to modernize its infrastructure, improve its energy sector, and strengthen its competitive edge in global markets. By fostering these industries, Mexico is positioning itself to become a more integral part of the global supply chain, expanding its influence in markets beyond the U.S. However, China's increasing presence in Mexico has raised concerns within the U.S. government. The U.S. sees the growing relationship between Mexico and China as a potential threat to its dominance in the region, particularly as Mexico plays a key role in supplying essential agricultural products and other goods to the U.S. The concern is that deeper ties between Mexico and China could weaken the U.S. economic influence over its southern neighbor. Furthermore, these investments may complicate the dynamics within the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, as the trade regulations outlined in the agreement could be influenced by Mexico's closer alignment with China. The U.S. views China as a strategic competitor in various sectors, and Mexico's increasing reliance on Chinese capital and technology could create tensions with the U.S. over trade and geopolitical issues. Nevertheless, China's growing investments in Mexico also reflect a broader global trend: the shift of economic power and capital away from traditional Western countries and toward emerging economies in Asia. Mexico, with its strategic location, manufacturing capabilities, and expanding industrial base, is well positioned to capitalize on these investments. The country can use Chinese capital to bolster its own economic development, reduce its reliance on U.S. markets, and strengthen its global trade position. This shift could help Mexico build a more balanced and resilient economy, better able to withstand external shocks or policy changes from its primary trade partner, the U.S. However, for Mexico to fully realize the benefits of these investments, it must navigate the complexities of balancing its relationships with both the U.S. and China. It will need to maintain stable trade policies within the framework of the USMCA and other international agreements, while also forging new, mutually beneficial partnerships with China. Mexico's ability to balance these relationships carefully will be key to ensuring its long-term economic growth and stability. By strategically managing its international ties and maintaining strong diplomatic relationships, Mexico can ensure that it continues to develop economically without becoming overly reliant on any one country or trade partner. In this way, Mexico can maintain a steady path towards sustainable development and secure its place in the increasingly interconnected global economy. China's moving in on Mexico like it's setting up a new HQ for global domination. But hey, if this means cheaper gadgets and better energy deals for everyone, I'm all in. So, what's your take? Is Mexico about to be the next big player in the global market, or will the US come out on top? Let's hear your thoughts. US tariffs are pushing Mexico to seek new export markets, with China, Canada, and the EU becoming key partners. The goal is to reduce dependence on the US and strengthen Mexico's economic stability. In my opinion, this strategy is a smart move for Mexico to achieve sustainable development and enhance resilience. What do you think? Will this strategy help Mexico become a bigger global player? Share your thoughts below. Thanks for watching. If you found this useful, like, share, and subscribe for more neutral and insightful analyses. See you in the next video.